Our calendar will come up, and now, Steve. Thank you for listening. Today's lovers of flowering trees, let me introduce the expert, Mr. Steve Pearson. He loves nature and is passionate about the importance of trees to a healthy environment. He served as chair of the City of Miami Committee on Beautification and the Environment in the 1990s and has been involved with the Poinciana Fiesta since the late 1980s. He is the founder and past president of Tremendous Miami, the Flowering Tree Society, and the Friends of Chapman Field. After working most of his adult life as an attorney, he then worked as director of the University of Miami's John C. Gifford Arboretum for 7 years. He's also served on the board of Fairchild Tropical Botanical Garden for over 20 years and is on the board of Montgomery Botanical Center today. Besides many local awards and recognitions, he has been selected as Florida's most outstanding volunteer in 1994 by the Florida Urban Forestry Council and was awarded the National Medal for Citizen Activism in 1995 by the American Forest and National Urban Forestry Council. Today, Steve will present the history of the Royal Poinciana, its origins in South Florida, and its use by early settlers, as well as information on the care and horticultural aspects of the tree and the inspiration it has provided in art, music, and poetry. Steve, take over.
Thank you, Ellen. That was a very impressive presentation you gave us. I wish there was some way to support the library without our taxes going up. But like Warren Buffett said, it's a privilege and obligation as Americans to pay our taxes. So that's one part that's going for a good purpose. I also thank you everybody for coming today. I wasn't sure we'd get a good turnout because I gave this same program 2 years ago. But unfortunately, that time the audio-visual stuff wasn't working right, so nothing got recorded. So hopefully we'll be doing better today. And I think with Mark here, he's in control of everything, so we should be okay. I want to thank Robert Burr, who invited me again to come today. He's the president of the Miami Pioneers and Natives of Dade. And I also want to recognize a couple of special people. We have Frank Janisek. I saw him a second. Where are you, Frank? There he is. Frank, come in here. This is the president of the Flowering Tree Society. Doing a great job because the Flowering Tree Society literally had a collapse of its leadership a few years ago, and Frank stepped in and has really done a great job. I also want to recognize Martha Toth, who's our membership secretary. Society. And last, I need to say thank you to my wife, Steve Pearson. I don't know if I need. But it's so good to be here, and I think since it is the Natives of Dade, I'll take a minute and talk a minute about my background and why I talk the way I do. I was born in the 50s when people said Miami here. And part of that is because of my father's side of the family. They came from Southwest Georgia. My grandfather, I.T. Pearson, was brought down in 1919 or 1920 to be the principal of the Redlands Farm Life School down in the Redlands. At that time, that school was 1st through 12th grade. And he had 2 children when he moved to Miami, and his third, Christopher Dade Pearson, was born right after they came. And then my father, Ray Pearson, was born in 1922. And they lived in a little house on Southwest 157th Avenue, just south of 232nd Street, basically right across the street from Anderson's Corners. And that little house, a little wooden house, was still there until the early 90s. But at that point, it was torn down, and it's on some property that's now occupied by a school for, I think, preschool children, young children. At any rate, my grandfather was promoted. It was basically the first superintendent of the Dade County school system. That's when we had all of 4 high schools, and they moved to Lemon City. And my father grew up, and my grandparents lived in a house at 17 Northeast 59th Street until their deaths. And that little house is still there, although sadly, to me, they used to have a side yard that I loved that was full of guavas and citrus trees. And now that was all torn down to squeeze another house in there. My mother, she was an Okie. She wasn't born here, but she was born in Oklahoma in 1924. Her family were farmers, and they lost their farm in the early 30s. And just like out of the grapes of wrath, they moved to Oklahoma, to California, thinking there was going to be jobs or a new start for them. And they found out that's not true. So after they got out there, her sister Betty was born in California. They somehow scraped enough money together to come back to Oklahoma, where they went to Tulsa. And Pop worked as a short order cook until they could get enough more money to go the opposite direction. And they came all the way to Miami. And I'm not sure exactly where they were settled initially, but I know it was somewhere up in North Dade. And my grandmother, Nana Stevens, had a chicken farm where she was selling eggs, and Pop learned construction and that side of the business. I was born in a duplex. Well, to go back, my mother and father both went to Edison High School. My father went off to World War II, and when he came back, that's when they first started dating. He went to University of Miami Law School, and they got married right after he graduated. And I soon followed in 1952. I was born in a duplex on Northeast 1st Avenue at about 58th Street. And later, when they built Morningside Park in the 50s, my mother's father, Pop, he built our house at 640 Northeast 53rd Street, excuse me. And that house was a well-built house. It's still there. And we'd probably still be there too, but in the 60s, there was a lot of racial tension, and a boy who lived 3 houses from us got beat to an inch of his life because he was waiting for a bus at a bus station and got jumped. And so my parents said enough. And so we moved down to Pinecrest. When Pinecrest was basically just a middle-class area with big yards. It was a great place to live in high school. I later, went on to college. That's the only time I haven't lived in Miami. And I then became a lawyer. And I guess I always loved trees. I was in the Boy Scouts as a kid. I didn't care much about the rules and the badges, but I loved going camping. And so I discovered the outside world of Florida as a young boy. And I bought my first house in 1976. And I knew I wanted an avocado and a mango tree, but past that, I didn't know what to get. So I started going to Fairchild Gardens, and I fell in love with flowering trees. So that was the beginning of my interest in that. Anyway, Ellen told you most of my history with plants, and ended up with finishing my career. My daughter graduated from medical school, and I said, I'm out of here because I never really enjoyed law that much. It was interesting for a while, but I was kind of like Frank Zappa. I was only in it for the money by the end of my career. And so I left, and I had 7 good years at the Gifford Arboretum as the director there before I retired. The posters you're seeing around the room, we'll talk about more when we talk about the art inspiration of Poinciana's, but these are some of the Poinciana posters that have been created over the years since I've been involved with it. We also had a video up that was playing when most of you came in. That was 1950s and early 60s footage from the Wolfson archives. And you can see a lot of it was giving away Poinciana trees and festivities at the Bayfront Park. The music that was playing was various jazz versions of the song Poinciana Song of the Tree. That CD was made for me by Joe Donato, a great musician and friend of mine. And Joe is now making me another CD of the vocal versions of the song. So by next year, hopefully I'll have one with both instrumental and vocals on it. But it's such a beautiful song, I thought I'd take a minute to read the lyrics. The music was written by Nat Simon, and the lyrics were Buddy Bernier. There's some controversy because some people claim that it originally came from a Cuban musician's music, but Nat Simon always maintained that he wrote it himself, so I'm not sure what's the truth about that. But it's a beautiful song. Unfortunately, I can't sing it to you, but I'll read it. Blow, tropic breeze, sing a song through the trees. Trees sigh to me, soon my love I will see. Poinciana, your branches speak to me of love. Pale moon is casting shadows from above. Poinciana, somehow I feel the jungle beat. Within me, there grows a rhythmic, savage beat. Love is everywhere. Its magic perfume fills the air. To and fro you sway. My heart's in time. I've learned to care. Poinciana, though skies may turn from blue to gray, my love will live forever and a day. It's a beautiful song. I mean, very sexy too. But that song was recorded by many singers, including Frank Sinatra, Bing Crosby, Johnny Mathis, Diane Shore, Percy Faith, and my favorite version was by Nat King Cole. It's also been recorded by over 40 jazz artists, including Glenn Miller, Benny Carter, George Shearing, Dave Brubeck, Jerry Mulligan, Sonny Rollins, Keith Jarrett, McCoy Tyner, Gato Barbiera, and my favorite, which is a 1958 version by Ahmad Jamal that was recorded live at the Pershing on an album called But Not For Me. And that was part of that CD we heard. Let's move on now. We'll talk a little about the botanical aspects and origins of the Poinciana. The tree comes from Madagascar, which is an island off the east coast of Africa. And its climate is very similar to ours. It's characterized by hot weather, but also by wet and dry seasons. So that's how the Poinciana evolved. And if those of you who are from Miami and know this area, that's basically the same weather pattern we have. Dry winters, wet summers. And it used to be cooler in the winter. Now it's hot all the time, but it's basically a very well-suited habitat. It's very suitable for our alkaline soils here. Somebody asked me about indigenous uses of Poincianas, and there really isn't much. Sometimes the people of Madagascar use it for firewood, but it's really not a very good tree for firewood. The wood's very soft. It's also sometimes eaten, but it's a starvation food. I tried to find more information about that, but all you can read is like, well, they eat the leaves. But I think what they ate was the young shoots when the fresh leaves are coming out. They have a very little green before the leaves actually sprout out. And I think they cut that up, stir fry it, or put it in soups, things like that. Another endemic use would be as a maraca. The seeds can make a great musical shaker. And I had 2 of these before I let Joe Donato borrow one, and it somehow disappeared. But I still got this one that I'm holding on to. It was, quote, discovered by Wenceslas Boyer in 1824, excuse me. He was a French botanist who lived in Czechoslovakia, and he named the tree Poinciana regia after his good friend Philippe de Poncy, who was then the head of the French West Indies. It was later reclassified as Delaunix regia, but still commonly called Poinciana even today. Boyer took the seeds back to Mauritius and then on to England, and gradually the trees were spread around the world. Today it's a pan-tropical tree you can find anywhere in the world where it's warm. So it's been a very successful tree to spread around the world. You might say it's using us as the fellow, what's the guy who wrote the book, Botany of Desire? I have a senior moment here.
Holland.
Yeah, he basically had the theory that some plants are using us. He cited marijuana and corn and tulips, but Poinciana would be another one. You know, it couldn't have gotten around the world without us taking it and putting it there. But some of the other names that have been used with the tree are flamboyant, flame of the forest, peacock flower, flame tree, and queen of the flowers. In botanical meaning, it's part of the Fabaceae family, which used to be called the Leguminosae. That's the bean family. Many of the Leguminosae or legumes are known as being nitrogen-fixing properties in the soil, but Poincianas do not do that. Not all Fabaceae do that, but some people sometimes think it does. Its leaves are deciduous. They all fall off in the winter months, and we'll talk more about that later. But Doyle McKee, who was a botanist at the University of Miami back in the 80s, he described it as a radiator. You think of a radiator as something that, you know, lets water or coolness go through. And he said the reason this leaflet has so much, you know, air is to let the leaf come into the leaf and cool it down a little bit. Because, you know, believe it or not, Madagascar is even hotter than it is here. Yeah. Its shape is always wider than tall if it's allowed to grow naturally. In fact, when you see a Poinciana that's been growing in a bunch of trees and it's shot up 30 or 40 feet without spreading, look out, because those are the ones that'll blow over in a hurricane. Naturally, they're very hurricane-resistant trees because they have an open canopy. Some people complain because what will happen is the canopy will shade out the lower branches and the branches will die and they'll fall off. But to me, that's a wonderful asset here if you got a tree that will let the wind blow through it and survive hurricanes. They call that self-pruning. It also drops the leaves in the wintertime, but that's good for your soil too. One of the problems with our soil, it doesn't have much organic matter. So we should welcome that, not act like it's a problem. They're very little leaves and they disintegrate very quickly. The flowers range from red to canary yellow. We have an orange one here, and my friend Peter Ostrowski brought in the yellow. And one thing I want to point out about the flowers, we all know that they have a lighter petal sometimes. That light petal is telling the pollinator that the flower is ready to be pollinated. It's a signal to the insects to come visit me. After 1 or 2 days, that petal will roll up and it'll go to the color of the rest of the flower, whether it's orange or yellow, and then it'll reopen. That's why if you look at flowers from a Poinciana, most of them will be one color. It's because they're already past that one white or yellow petal stage. Yellow is a recessive gene, kind of like blue eyes is with human beings. And so without grafting the tree, it's impossible to know for sure that you're getting a yellow. But we have many seedlings in the back, and at the end of the program, if you'd like to take a Poinciana home, you're welcome to take one. The trees with the yellow tag are coming from a yellow tree. So your chances of getting a yellow are much higher than if you take one with the orange tags. Those are from an orange tree and almost certainly will be orange. But there's no guarantee that if you get one with a yellow tag, it'll be yellow. You have to just kind of wait and see. The only other way to get one is to graft them. But Poincianas are very difficult to graft because they have a soft wood. But a lot of the seedlings will come to seed. And when Larry Schockman and I started doing these Poinciana tours back in the 80s, late 80s and early 90s, there was only 2 yellow Poincianas in Dade County. One was the tree that Frank Smathers had. It was on the back of his property on the Stafford Creek Canal. You can see it when you cross the Stafford Creek Canal going south. The other one was a tree up in the Rhodes area that was called Lucretia, after the lady that owned it. Well, that tree was cut down, and Smathers' tree has not been kept care of. It's not in good shape. But thanks to growers like Peter Ostrowski and other people that have grown these yellow trees, they're now fairly common. In fact, there's a nice yellow one right outside the library here. And the yellows range from canary yellow, like the one in front of the campong, to a deeper golden yellow like this one. The oranges range from a very light, what we call Kool-Aid orange, to an almost red. Some people say there is a red, and there's a picture in one of these. You'll see one that is actually red, but that is very, very rare. Usually the most you could hope for if you want something that's red is to get something that's a very deep reddish orange. But they're beautiful trees, and thankfully there's many of them here in South Florida. It's the official flowering tree of Miami-Dade County, and it's also the official tree of Key West. One other thing I want to mention about the soft-wooded, they're very hard to move. A lot of trees, people will say, oh, I got to move my big tree because it takes so many years. Well, with Poincianas, you're better off starting with a new one. Unless there's something really, really special that you want to really make sure you save this tree, just get a new tree. They're literally a weed. They grow very quickly. You have a tree that'll bloom in 3 to 5 years if you just keep care of it. And by keep care of it, this is a tree that thrives on benign neglect. It doesn't have any, fertilizer requirements really. It doesn't need, any problems with pests. It just needs to be left alone and properly planted. And I'm not saying you shouldn't water it, when you first put it in, yes, water your tree till it gets established. But after that, do not water it. A lot of people come on tours, they say, well, I've had my Poinciana in the ground for 5 years, it won't bloom, and I keep such good care of it. And I said, well, do you water it in the wintertime? And they say, of course. And I say, aha, and that's your problem. They need that dry period. And if you all remember back a few weeks ago how we had that intense heat and intense dryness, I think that's one of the reasons we're having such a great bloom right now. A lot of trees, in fact, all trees, when they bloom, it's a response to stress. It's basically the seeds are a mechanism for self-preservation. So when you stress a tree, and people, in the old days, they used to go beat citrus trees with brooms, and there's all sorts of different things they do to stress trees to get them to try to bloom. But a Poinciana, all it needs is a good shot of dry weather. They're very drought tolerant, even though they do need water also to have a good bloom. If they had dry all the time or water all the time, they would still bloom some, but we wouldn't get the big fantastic blooms we get here in South Florida without that dichotomy of seasons. I mentioned they're very fast growing, so that means they need lots of room too. They're wider rather than tall. A healthy Poinciana will be 3 to 4 times wider than it is tall. So think about that. One of the reasons we don't see as many, I think, as I would like to see in our areas, because the yards are getting smaller. A lot of people just don't have room for them anymore in their yards. So they're better as a street tree and as a park tree for most people. There was an old joke that if you want to enjoy your Poinciana, plant it in your neighbor's yard because they get so big, so you can see it, sitting from your house. But as Larry Schockman used to tell people, you can prune these trees. They respond well to pruning, and you can keep it small, but then you're kind of making the tree grow in an unnatural way too. So it's best when you see them out in a big area where they have room to really grow. They are salt air tolerant. They can grow close to the coast, but they don't like being inundated with salt water. You know, if a hurricane comes, you could lose the tree if it's sitting in salt water for days at a time. Some of the objections to them are the roots are very aggressive, and that's true. I wouldn't plant it right next to your driveway or your sidewalk. Put it somewhere where it has room for the roots to grow as well. It's deciduous, meaning it drops all its leaves, but you know, think of the advantages of that. You're getting organic matter back into your soil. And the only thing about that is if your house faces south, I would not put it on the southeast corner of your property. I learned that the hard way because I used to have a house that faced south, and I'd go out to the street every morning to pick up my newspaper. And during the winter months, when it's dropping leaves every day, I would bring back 200 leaves into the house, you know, when I came back in. So that's something to be aware of. There's also the complaint that, you know, they're so aggressive in taking the water and taking the sunlight that nothing grows underneath them. But a great plant to put underneath them is bromeliads. So if you want to have plants underneath your poinciana to fill in it with green, try bromeliads. History in South Florida, we don't really know when the first poincianas came here. We know that by 1903, based on a Miami Herald article, there was a big one on Poinciana Avenue. And I don't think they would have named the street Poinciana Avenue if they didn't have more than just that one. There's an urban myth that David Fairchild brought the tree here. And we know the tree was here before he came. He did in 1910 plant many down in the Brickell area when he first came down here, because he was brought down to start the plant introduction station, which was originally up in the Brickell area. And we also know that the oldest documented tree still alive today was one that his wife Miriam planted at the Campong, their home, in 1917. And that is the oldest documented one we know. We don't know if there aren't any older, but that's the only one we know for sure when it was planted, and that's the oldest. In 1922, Edwin Menninger was kind of the grandfather of flowering trees in Florida. He described it as growing and blooming in Miami. In 1926, the naturalist Charles Torrey Simpson stated that poincianas were common from Key West to the Redlands in his book, Florida Wildlife. In 1926, Georgine Mercer, in a correspondence to Mr. and Mrs. Paul Ransom, indicated that some of the few trees still standing in the Keys after the tough hurricane of 1926 were the poincianas. A special planting here in our area was in 1929 when Jerry Curtis, who was then the head of the Miami Parks Department, planted the famous old trees on South Miami Avenue. When I was a child, I remember going there in the summertime. You'd always see artists underneath the trees painting the flowers and all this. But by the late 80s and the 90s, the trees were declining very badly. What was happening, big branches were just cracking off and falling down, and so the trees were being taken out. And I took it on myself to study that problem, and it became clear to me that the problem was sodium vapor lighting. That's a type of lighting used basically for crime lights because it extends such a long time. But for some reason, poincianas respond very negatively to that kind of lighting. And I got a meeting of City of Miami officials, Florida Power and Light, some other utility people. They all came and they all agreed that was the problem and that they would fix it. Well, then Hurricane Andrew came. And all of a sudden, that project got moved down to the bottom of the list. I did get them after Hurricane Andrew came to take out some of these big Cobra head lights with the sodium vapor lights. What the sodium vapor light does, it makes the leaves stay on the tree year round. And so in the wintertime, the tree was still having leaves, and you think, well, this leave's not very heavy, but when you think about 1 million of them up there, and the tree can't get water to sustain the weight of these, big branches started cracking off. And sure enough, when they put these 3 lower lights, those trees started doing better. But nothing was done until about 10 years later, when Arboretum Parks and Robert McCabe, who were living on South Miami Avenue, rallied the neighbors to make an outcry about this. And they replaced all of the Poincianas, which were mostly in bad shape by that time. Lisa Hammer went out and studied them, and she basically said that they need to go. They're all in bad health. But they were replanted, and like I said, they're fast growing, and the trees are looking great again. One other thing I didn't mention is, there were these sodium vapor lights were put in to prevent crime, and it was a total failure because the trees were in such, full foliage all around that none of the light was getting down in the ground. Somebody could get mugged or worse underneath these trees and nobody could even see it because the light was all up 30 feet in the air of the canopy. So they solved the problem. They got much prettier lights installed now. It solved the problem for the trees. It solved the problem for any crime that might occur. So it was a win-win. The 1930s was a time of many plantings in our area. Many of the oldest trees come from that era. There was a fellow named Wayne Livingston Street in Coral Gables, and he got the Coral Gables Chamber of Commerce to plant about 3,000 trees in 1936 that he personally donated. There was another lady named Mrs. Robert Lassiter, who was the head of the Miami Beach Garden Club, and she led the charge to plant many of the old trees we see in Miami Beach today, mostly in 1937. And those two got to be friends with Major Harvey Payne, who at that time was the chair of the Civics Affairs Committee of the Miami Chamber of Commerce. And those 3 worked together to start promoting more and more plantings of Poincianas and motorcades to go view them. The first Poinciana Fiesta, or festival at that time, was 1937, when City of Miami Mayor Robert Williams proclaimed Royal Poinciana Day. And it was an emphasis on planting more trees in the city. 1938 saw the first week-long festival, and there was an event called the Poinciana Tree Pilgrimage, which was a late afternoon motorcade to see the Killian tree. At the time, that was the biggest tree in Miami. It was owned by County Commissioner Dan Killian on Federal Highway, which we call US 1, somewhere close to Kendall Drive. But they would have motorcades to see this tree. They lit it up at night. The Symphony Band would play and do programs there. 1939, Mayor Sewell of Miami proclaimed Royal Poinciana Week. June 4th had a motorcade of supposedly 500 trees from the Orange Bowl to the Killian tree. And the Miami Herald wrote, "Flaming red and orange draped branches to the heavens, a riot of charming, indescribable color and beauty." Obviously, the tree inspires people, but I thought that was a great description. 1937 to 39, the celebrations continued by being sponsored by the Miami Chamber of Commerce, Poinciana Celebration Committee. That was those 3 people. 1940, the annual Royal Poinciana Festival, it was chaired by Mrs. Murray Forbes Whittichin, and she chaired it for 3 years until 1942. 1940 was also the year we had the first Royal Poinciana Queen. That was a student named Virginia Alt. And for many years, it was basically just a beauty contest. And at that time also, basically just decided who would be the queen in the court. It wasn't anything that was a competition, just said, these students are it, that's who it was. And they'd have a coronation pageant down in Bayfront Park usually. They have concerts with Caesar LaMonica, giveaways of trees, things like that. I'm not sure when that model changed, but today, with the Flower and Tree Society sponsoring the Fiesta, it's no longer just a beauty contest. In fact, it's not a beauty contest. These are high school girls that are chosen for academic achievement, civic involvement, and an interest in either horticulture or botany or the environment. We've had some outstanding girls, and we give them, we're a small group, so we can't give them big money, but we give $4,000 a year away to these girls, $2,000 to the queen and $1,000 each to the princesses. So we're trying to keep that tradition going, but not just as a beauty contest, and actually rewarding deserving women, that are young women that are going on to college. 1946, 1943 to 45 are the war years, World War II, and the festival wasn't as big then, but the City of Miami Recreation Department kept it going on a smaller scale. 1946, the annual Royal Poinciana Festival was incorporated, and it sponsored the festival for 15 years. It waxed and waned in some of those years, but back in those days, Miami didn't have a lot of alternatives like we do today for entertainment. And the Poinciana Fiesta was a big thing. People looked forward to it. They came down to Bayfront Park to hear the music and see their friends and hang out. However, that ended in 1960. And at that point, the city of Miami started sponsoring the festival and had its Miami Beautification Committee take charge of it. Albert Pallett, who was a local lawyer in downtown Miami, was the chair of the committee for 30 years, and they kept the festival going. One thing Al used to say, which I think is very true, is the Poinciana is a tree for all citizens, rich and poor, all religions. It unites us in loving beauty and a healthy environment. But it was a different kind of festival under his leadership. He was given lots of money by the city. So they had clean up, fix up parades and, you know, big art shows and pageants and things like this. There wasn't much planting. Although I looked at the old yearbooks because they would make a report every year to the City of Miami Commission. Every year there'd be a picture of a few guys in coats and ties with the gold shovels by a Poinciana tree. But it wasn't, you know, a big part of the festival those days. Al Pallett, well, I got involved in 1988 when the Flower and Tree Society was also formed. That's why I first knew Helen Edson, who was the Poinciana lady of our era. You know, she was so single-mindedly in love with Poincianas, you know, she could hardly talk about anything else. And she wanted us to name the Flower and Tree Society the Royal Poinciana Society. And Larry Schottman and I and others had to kind of convince her that it was just too narrow of a focus for a group that was going to go on and do bigger and better things, we hoped. Larry Schottman was a great member of our society, really the backbone of the group for many years. He was also the director of the Campong. And about the same time I got involved with the Committee on Beautification, he got involved also. There was a woman named Kathy Galbas, who was the chair of the committee. Some of you may know her. She was a community leader in Coral Gables and responsible for many tree plantings in that area. And she got involved with the Beautification Committee and chaired the Fiesta for many years. We had our first tree planting in 1989 that I set up. And we also did a planting in Legion Park, a small park on Biscayne Boulevard, 60-something Street. I don't remember exactly, but if you're familiar with Northeast Miami, you know that park. But Kathy and Helen convinced me to join the Fiesta and the committee, and that was the start of my involvement. And I would accompany Kathy down to the county commission to try to raise money for the Fiesta. We tell her what an opportunity this was for, you know, foreign tourism, ecotourism. At the time, people were coming through Miami just to get on another plane to go to Costa Rica. We tried to say, hey, you know, these people are interested in trees. And their response was like, where's the golf tournament? Where's the fishing tournament? So they didn't get the appeal of trees at all. So we never got very far. But anyway, Al decided to retire, and I became the chair of the committee. It was called then the Committee on Beautification and Environment in 1990. And we had a lot less money. I think the city also used that as an excuse to claw back some of the money they were giving Pallet and his group. But we had an emphasis on tree planting, and we did many plantings along the highways and parks. And we stressed how, with proper planning and you know, some maintenance care, we could greatly expand the palette of trees that are grown in this area. Unfortunately, you know, we have this kind of mindset. There's only like 15 trees that get planted over and over and over. And we've got incredible diversity that could be planted. Native diversity that we don't see, and many, many good flowering trees and other foreign trees that we don't see. And there's this kind of no thinking black and white dichotomy, you know, native good, exotic bad, but that's silly. You know, without exotics, we wouldn't have any food to eat. You know, Thomas Jefferson once said that one of the greatest things you can do for a society is to introduce a useful plant into its culture. And that's very true. Unfortunately, we also know now that the opposite is true. That if you introduce some invasive, disruptive plant, you can also do the most damage. But we gotta be more enlightened in our handling of the public environment, I feel. That's the point of what I'm trying to say. We can't just try to live with black and white rules. I mean, I've never met a ficus that warblers don't like. I don't care if it's a native ficus or a foreign ficus. You know, you're helping those trees, which either one you put there, those birds. Anyway, we continued the fiesta, and it had some great years. One of the years I was, I did the first what we called workshop in 1990 at Fairchild. And then Larry took that over, and we call it the workshop in these days. It was basically the same thing you're at today, but we tried to update it and call it symposium because people don't want to come to work. They want to have a nice time. So hopefully that's a better title. One of the special years I remember fondly was in 1996, where at Fairchild we had an event called Taste of the Tropics. And that event was chaired by an old friend called Ruth Hopkins Rosenthal, who was part of both the Flower and Tree Society and the Tropical Fruit Group. And her and Linda White, who was at that time the president of Rare Fruit Council International, were the leaders of this event. And it was a huge success. We had different fruits for people to sample. We had Alan Susser and Norman Van Aken, who came and created great little treats for everybody to try. And it was so big and successful that Fairchild then said, that's great. And that's where they got the idea for the Mango Mania. And that's where that thing started. But we did one more year of Taste of the Tropics, which was the following year when we moved the fiesta to the old Museum of Science. But after that, you know, we were out of money because one of the other sides was, if you remember, in 1996, the city of Miami had a terrible financial shortfall. All of a sudden, it was discovered that $65 million had somehow disappeared. Governor Lawton Childs appointed a oversight committee for all the finances of the city. And the city announced no more money for festivals. So later they said, well, we didn't mean you guys. That was really about Goombay, because apparently with Goombay, there was some issues with graft and money that was disappearing. But in the meantime, a lot of people had gotten together and said, hey, we need to take this tree planting effort county-wide. And that's when Tremendous Miami, which still goes on today, was formed. But some of the old Poinciana Fiesta stalwarts were dropping out, partly because of age, partly discussed with the way the city had treated us. And unfortunately, Tremendous Miami, although they sponsored the Fiesta for 3 years, I forgot to mention that it became the Fiesta because of Al Pallet. When he was the chair, he decided to change it from festival to Fiesta as a way of welcoming the Cuban immigrants, which I thought was a nice idea. But I don't know if it got many Cubans interested in our festival, but it was a way of saying welcome to the Cuban immigrants. And it's been Fiesta ever since then.
When was that? What year?
It was the early 60s. I'm not sure exactly which year, maybe 1960, but it was definitely Fiesta by the time I got involved with it. Anyway, we used the money the committee had to sponsor in 1996, 97, 98. And then Tremendous Miami took it over and sponsored it for 1999, 2000, and 2001. Tremendous Miami, its purpose is to plant, promote, and protect trees in Miami-Dade County. Some of the board didn't think that the Poinciana Fiesta was a very good use of our funds. So we basically decided to drop the Fiesta. And at that time, Tropical Flower and Tree Society came in and started sponsoring it in 2002. That year they had help from Tremendous Miami, but after that, the Flower and Tree Society has kind of been doing it all by itself since then. It's a small group, doesn't have much funding, but we're big in our ambitions and our hearts, so we keep it going. We've had some very good years since then. We're happy now that since 2019, the city of Coral Gables has gotten more involved. They're not giving us much financial support, but they give us a discount on the trolleys and some help. And that's thanks primarily to formerly Commissioner, now Vice Mayor Rhonda Anderson. And also, some good news happened in 1922. Tremendous Miami started co-sponsoring the Fiesta again and providing some funding to Flower and Tree Society to keep it going. Let's talk a minute about Poinciana and art. All these different posters are different artists. One on the end is one by Alfred Browning Parker. He did the posters in the late 80s and early 90s. You can see 4 more of his over on the wall. They're kind of a very distinctive color scheme and design, mostly more modern. Poincianas are planted by artists around the world. Cuban artists paint them. Any tropical country, you'll see paintings of them. But they're a common subject for many Florida artists, including Beanie Bacchus. He did that second poster there. That was our poster for the 1998 Fiesta. In more recent years, you all know who the Florida Highwaymen are? Yeah. A group of Florida artists that were Black. And this is one by James Gibson. And that was our 2023 Fiesta poster. And this is one by Linda Apriletti, who's a very talented local artist. And she did our 2019, poster. We didn't have we had a virtual festival in 20 and 2021 because of COVID. But we don't have a poster every year because we basically need somebody to underwrite that. But both the Apriletti and the Gibson posters are available in the back of the room when we finish for a very reasonable price of $10 if you'd like to avail yourself of one. And if anybody wants to sponsor the poster in 2025, please see me after the event.
How much does it cost?
To sponsor it? Probably about $500, $500 or $600. It's not huge money, but like I said, the Flower and Tree Society only has about 100 members. And so we're doing all we can just to keep the scholarships going. And when we can, we do a poster. And I have a couple more highwaymen that will give us their paintings if we can just get some funding. So I'm hoping we'll move forward with that. Last year we had a very good.
Marsh is in the back if you would like to join. Don't forget about that.
Well, Yeah, please visit that table at the end of my presentation.
How much does it cost to join?
I think it's $30. Where's Marcia?
$30.
$30.
30 for 1 year.
A year, 2 years, 5 years is bargain.
It's a bargain. You're welcome to come to our meetings for free. It's open to the public. You know, we're trying to educate and promote flowering trees, at least the good ones. You know, we don't want to see invasive species planted any more than you do. And most flowering trees are not invasive, and we try to avoid promoting any that are. So, you know, if you can support us, please join, get involved, help us with the fiesta. We need more help.
At the end of the meeting, they have the tree growers come and they auction off. And you get a beautiful, healthy tree for very little.
Yeah, you get very good bargains sometimes.
Incredible.
If you're in aeroids and orchids, those things go for very high prices, but flowering trees tend to be lower priced, and you get a lot of bang for your buck, so to speak.
And where are those meetings held?
Fairchild Tropical Garden. What day?
Every first Tuesday of the month.
Yes.
7:30.
Oh,
Second
Tuesday.
Tuesday.
But we don't have it in the summer, so you know, go to our website tfts.org and see what's going on before you head over to Fairchild. We don't meet in July and August, and this is our June event, but start in October, November, or September, October, November, December. We have either meetings or December's our holiday party, and that's always a lot of fun too.
Steve, on the picture that we just saw, the yellow one, that one. Is that the white flower that's sticking straight up, that's curled?
Yes, those are all of them look like they're curled to me. Of the white, as you can see on this one, the yellow trees have more of a pale yellow petal instead of the more white one like this one has. But all the flowers do that. They have 5 petals. When they first open, one will be much lighter. See how this one's curling up? That's because it's already a day or 2 old. And it'll open back up and be the same color as this when it does open. One last thing I'll mention, and then we can see if there's any questions. In the back of the room, we have seedlings that you're welcome to help yourself if you like. The ones with the yellow tags are seedlings from yellow trees. Like I said, yellow is a recessive gene, or just kind of like blue eyes, but you got a pretty good chance of getting a yellow one if you try one of those seedlings. There's also some with orange tags. Those are from orange trees, and it's almost certain you're going to get an orange tree. If we run out of orange trees, come tomorrow night, let me know, and I'll bring you some more tomorrow night. It's most people, like I said, they want yellows because they're rarer, but you know, they're all beautiful to me. It's just kind of a personal question. If you got lots of room, put one of each in. But, those, I want to say thank you to Paul Garricky. He's the treasurer of the Flower and Tree Society for many years, and he's also an excellent grower, and he grew these seedlings for us.
And if you come to the meetings, before every meeting, he's really an amazing grower professional, and he will identify the flowers that you bring. So that's really a great resource to find out what's in your yard. And just bring it to the meetings, and he'll identify it. So, and tell you how to grow it, or what you're doing right, what you're doing wrong.
The last thing before I let everybody go, we talked about art, we talked about music. Would you like to hear a poem or two?
Yeah,
that
sure.
features the Poinciana? I'll read.
Excuse me. Also mentioned that they have a schedule of all the events coming up.
Oh yeah, we have the schedules back in the back with all the rest of the Poinciana Fiesta events. So you pick up one of those too if you're interested. This is a book called Poinciana Poems by Vivian Larimore Rader. She was poet laureate of Florida, and I'm going to read Which one was I reading now? What's the page? What number it is? It's called Tree of Flame. Poinciana, Tree of Flame, dancing on your rooted toes. Like the wind, your glory came. Like the wind, your glory goes. Rhythm that the tempest sows, Poinciana, Tree of Flame. Let your petticoats of rose make the other trees seem tame. Moses must have known the same. Burning sign your bow bestows. Poinciana, Tree of Flame, wooed by every wind that blows. None can speak of you in prose, like a song, your very name, flowing as a river flows, Poinciana, Tree of Flame. This is one of my favorites. It says, go softly now. Go softly now with bated breath and put away the thought of death. For life, a crimson torrent sweeps across a land where beauty keeps. An ancient tryst and cove and fen, the Poinciana blooms again. Go softly through this hallowed hour that brings the lacy bow to flower. Nor let one gay or sodden word above the scarlet tide be heard. No sound except the heart's amen. The Poinciana blooms again. Wow. Go softly lest you're going loose, one petal from its silken noose. So brief in its glory, so elate, the slightest sound can confiscate. The song of fire in glade and glen, the Poinciana blooms again. Thank you. I'll answer any questions, and yes.
It's a little different from Poinciana, but what's happened to the jacarandas? I just don't even see them anymore.
Well, one thing about jacaranda, there's many types of jacarandas. And the traditional jacaranda was called Jacaranda mimosa. And all the jacarandas come from Brazil, but there's certain ones that are much more adapted for our tropical climate. I would look for one called Cuspidifolia. There used to be one at Fairchild, right at the Bailey Glade Overlook, that was prized by everybody because it has a bigger leaflets and a deeper purple bloom, but it also blooms more profusely.
They had one at Cocoa Plum Circle, and they took it out. You know where the little baby shoes are? Yeah. They took it out.
Well, I can't answer why they did that, but mimosifolia needs a shot of, it needs a shot of cold air to really bloom well. That's why that tree does much better up in Tampa than it does here. But there are other jacarandas for sure that are worth growing.
I'm not saying, I can't find it. I drive around.
Well, it's one of my frustrations because when the Flowering Tree Society started, we were getting so many more flowering trees out into the area, and some growers, passed on, moved away. We just don't have a lot of the species. I was looking for a tree recently called Cassia roxburghii. It used to be called Cassia marginata. And, I can't find it. I'm sure I'll find it, but it's just not as easy as it used to be. Growers will produce what people want. So if you keep telling them you want a jacaranda, especially if you go to the Flowering Tree Society meeting, you can talk to somebody like Peter or Paul, and maybe they'll get one for you. But they're just not as prevalent as they should be. Yes, Roseanne.
Do you have any idea what's the life expectancy of a Poinciana tree?
Well, they're not like a giant sequoia or the bristlecone pine that's going to live for 800 or thousands of years, but 100 years, 150 if they're well cared for. One other thing I should mention is a problem with Poincianas is what destroys some is that if they get a crotch, you have to be careful because if water goes down in that crotch, it'll start rotting out the tree in the middle, and all of a sudden your tree splits one. When I was at the Gifford Arboretum, they had a beautiful old tree close to the Arboretum. It actually wasn't in the Arboretum, but it was a great big old tree. And all of a sudden one day it literally is split in two and half of it fell down, had a big scar all the way to the ground, and they had to take the tree out. And you know, the answer to that problem is once you see that happening, you need to somehow divert that water. It sounds a little crazy because I remember when I first saw Cuban people, sometimes they used to put concrete in trees. But that is one answer to that problem. You fill up that cavity with concrete so the water doesn't collect there. But it could be anything just to keep the water out of that cavity. The other alternative is, while it's still healthy, cut off one side of the tree and it'll grow, you know, it'll seal off and be healthy. But what you don't want to do is just leave that for